Hello my friends, welcome to Lindy's Magpie Reads and another edition of Friday Reads. But before I talk about the books that I have finished recently, I want to talk about the federal holiday in Canada that's going to be tomorrow, September 30th. It's called the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, and it's also called Orange Shirt Day, and that's why I've got an orange shirt pin on, and that's why I did this orange shirt origami. There were directions on how to make that at the Edmonton Public Library, so I brought home this piece of paper and tried it out. So what is the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation? It is a day to honor the Indigenous children who never returned home from residential schools, and also the survivors of these residential schools. And it's also a day to honor their families and their communities. So in honor of truth and reconciliation, I am going to read to you from Louise Bernice Halfe's collection of poetry called Burning in This Midnight Dream. In the preamble, she writes, "The truth and reconciliation process opened the door to sharing the dark history. Truth is hard to find, however, hard to share, hard to hear. At times, those stories are understandably sanitized for the teller, for the audience, safe for polite company or church basements. These stories attempt to go deeper, but never fully plumb the depths. They are intended to share yet more of that truth. Think of all the children and weep. Children fed to pedophile priests and nuns. Children whipped and starved. Families and communities destroyed. Generation upon generation, courtesy of the Canadian government. Courtesy of the Canadian public." Louise Bernice Halfe was born in the Saddle Lake First Nation, which is very close to St. Paul, the nearest town to where I grew up on a farm. She was Saskatchewan's Poet Laureate, and she has also been Canada's Parliamentary Poet Laureate. This is her opening poem, Dedication to the Seventh Generation. There's some Nehiyaw Cree language in this poem. I'll just do my best with it. Aha, ota ka witamatin atsi misoin. I will share these stories, but I will not share those from which I will never crawl. It is best that way. I forget to laugh sometimes, though in these 40 years, my life has been filled with towering mornings, northern lights. Sit by the kotawan, the fireplace, drink Muskegon mint tea. Hold your soul, but do not weep. Not for me, not for you. Weep for those who haven't yet sung. Weep for those who will never sing." And that again is from Burning in This Midnight Dream by Louise Bernice Halfe. I have 7 books to tell you about today, and in the spirit of Shorty September, a lot of these are very short, including this first one, one poem in book form. It's by Michael Ondaatje, a Canadian poet and novelist who was born in Sri Lanka. And this edition has the poem in 2 languages, English and French. It's called Elimination Dance, or La danse éliminatoire. The translation is by Lola Lemire Tostevin. Now, the kind of dance that this is about is a type of country dance where the caller calls out some kind of category, and the people who are dancing that it applies to leave the dance until eventually everybody gets eliminated from the dance floor. This poem is pretty funny, and it's also illustrated with these antique type illustrations. Sometimes I laughed out loud as I was reading this. Basically, it's a list poem, and here are just some examples. Anyone who has had to step into an elevator with all of the Irish Rovers. Those currently working on a semaphore edition of War and Peace. Those who have unintentionally locked themselves within a sleeping bag at a camping goods store. Women who gave up the accordion because of pinched breasts. I think this one's my favorite. The person who borrowed my Martin Beck thriller, read it in a sauna, which melted the glue off the spine so the pages drifted to the floor, stapled them together, and returned the book thinking I wouldn't notice. And the final line, anyone with pain. And another little quickie, a short story in book form. Now this was from a series put out by the Canadian publisher Biblioasis. The series is The Haunted Bookshelf. This particular one, a gift to me from my friend Kathy, is called The Story of a Disappearance and an Appearance, a Ghost Story for Christmas. And it's written by M.R. James. I think it was first published in about 1912 or 1913. And the short story itself is set in the early 1800s. It is about a man whose uncle has disappeared. He was a pastor, and so this man writes to his brother to say it looks like he won't be going there to visit with his brother's family at Christmas because he's going to see if he can figure out what happened to his uncle. So this edition is designed and illustrated by the Canadian cartoonist Seth, and there is a Punch and Judy show that's part of the story, and something strange happens. It is a ghost story. It took me a while to figure out what was going on in the passage about the Punch and Judy show, but I found it quite entertaining. And you don't have to read it at Christmas time. Apparently it's a tradition to have read spooky stories at Christmas. I didn't know that. This is what I learned on the back of this book. So if you are somebody for whom this is one of your Christmas traditions, please let me know in the comments. I'm curious about that. And speaking of ghost stories, I have a spooky Canadian children's story for you next. It's called The Skull, and it's by Jon Klassen. Jon Klassen is a picture book illustrator. He now lives in the States, still a Canadian citizen. And this one is a retelling of a Tyrolean folktale. And in the back, he mentions that he first read this, the original folktale, in a library in Alaska. He was up there to do some kind of author visit, and this story called The Skull that was in a collection just kind of haunted him, stuck in his mind. And eventually, a few years later, he wrote to the library and to see if he could get them to track down this story. And they did. Librarians are great for that, aren't they? But he said when he read this story again, he was surprised that it wasn't the story that he remembered. In the year in between, his brain had changed it, and there's an entirely different ending than what he had remembered. his final paragraph in the author's note is, "This is a very interesting thing that our brains do to stories. If you read this book once and put it back on the shelf, and a year from now someone asks you how this story went, the same thing will happen. Your brain will change it. You will tell them a story that is a little different, maybe in a way your brain likes better. I like folk tales because that is what is supposed to happen to them. They are supposed to be changed by who is telling them, and you never find them the same way twice. I hope that you liked my brain's version." The Skull by Jon Klassen. This is perfect for elementary school age kids and kids of all ages. Next up is another picture book. This one is called Big, and it is by Vashti Harrison. I got all emotional reading this story about a girl with a big laugh and a big heart and very big dreams who grew and grew, and when she was little and people told her she was a big girl, that was a good thing. But as she got older, it became not such a good thing. There's an incident where she gets stuck in a swing. She talks about how words hurt, and the part where for her school recital, instead of getting to play a flower, the teacher wants her to be mountains. It breaks her heart, and it breaks mine too. And yet, this little girl decides to make more space for herself and to give back the hurtful words to the people who gave them to her. In the end, she decides she likes herself just the way she is. There's a wonderful author's note at the back where she said she did get stuck in a swing when she was younger, and she remembers thinking that she couldn't wear pink, that it was too bright a color and might make me stand out. So she made a conscious choice in this book to use pink as the main color. And I love the way that all of the other characters in this book are kind of in shadow, and the protagonist, this girl, is the only one who's in full color. Next up is another picture book, My Indigo World by Rosa Chang, subtitled A True Story of the Color Blue. Rosa Chang was born in South Korea, and she is a visual artist and natural indigo dyer, and this is her first picture book. She tells about her fascination with the color blue and goes into detail about how this blue color is extracted from various plants that contain indigo, and how indigo dye has been used around the world in traditional textiles. Next up is an adult graphic memoir called Ephemera. It's by Briana Loewinsohn. It has very little text. She's telling the story about the grief and loneliness of having a mother with mental illness, a mother who was often away from home and who died when the author was still a child. The art is just so dreamy and kind of captures that fogginess of childhood memories, especially when as a child you don't really understand what's going on, like why her mother is away so much, and she's not clear about how often her mother went away. Was it once? Was it many times? It's a very moving memoir, and this visual format is perfect for it. And last up, this is my favorite of the bunch, but not the only 5-star read. The Skull and Big and Ephemera were also 5-star reads. So, best book, Loop Tracks. This is a novel by the New Zealand author Sue Orr, and I listened to it in audiobook, read by Vanessa Rhodes. I was so happy to see that this audiobook was available through my library's Hoopla app, because Shawn the Book Maniac has been going on about how this might be his top book of the year. Of course, I really wanted to read it. And yeah, loved it, loved it, loved it. It's a story of a woman who was pregnant at age 16, and it starts out with her on the tarmac on a plane headed to Australia, because at that time all of the abortion clinics in New Zealand had closed, and it was the only way for her to terminate this pregnancy. And the next part of the book starts in about 2019. So this same protagonist is in her late 50s, and she's been living with her grandson, he's been living with her since he was 4 years old, and he's now about ready to start university, and he is autistic. So it's very much a story about these characters. In the description of the book, they talk about politics a lot, but for me, the politics in this book are more like part of the setting, and the author uses them to help develop her characters and show the kind of conflicts that her characters have with each other when they disagree on issues like abortion and assisted death. Yeah. Thoroughly enjoyed this book, and thank you, Shawn, for putting it on my radar. And that is all I've got to tell you about today, so thank you so much for watching, and please say hello in the comments down below. You know I love to hear from you, so let me know if you've read any of these, what you think of them, and I will see you all soon in the next one. Bye for now.